Those spring meetings. Good evening to you, Sherwin. Firstly, for people who are just hearing this term, the spring meetings, what's it all about?
Well, it's not winter. It's basically they have two meetings every year, biannual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank. And the first of each year is in April, which is spring in the Northern Hemisphere, spring here in the United States. A bit cloudy and rainy outside, a cool weather, but still warm inside where, as you mentioned, South Africa's Finance Minister, Nhlanhla Nene, South Africa's Reserve Bank Governor and the newly appointed chair of the International Monetary and Financial Committee joining their peers from around the world, really to examine the policy framework as it relates to the global economy and specific regions around the world. There will be another meeting later this year in Indonesia. Normally both are held in Washington, but the second meeting, which is called the fall or autumn meeting, will be held in October this year, and in a different location in Indonesia, which is my understanding, Francis.
So she also used the weather analogy. The sun is shining for global growth, but the clouds coming as well. We are below the curve, Sherwin. We're lagging so far behind global growth. What do we hope to achieve at these meetings?
Well, I think one can quote President Cyril Ramaphosa when we talk about what the targets are for South Africa, what we hope to achieve. He is, of course, throwing this number of 3% around. We've heard him speak about the 3% growth that he desires, a target certainly for his new investment envoys, really wanting to push South African growth to levels where we can tackle issues of youth unemployment, a stubbornly high unemployment. But, of course, as you mentioned, the World Economic Outlook of the IMF just releasing that report a few days ago, talking about 1.5% growth for South Africa. This is, of course, an uptick from their projections late last year, but this is, of course, not enough, certainly not enough in terms of what has been spelt out by the National Development Plan, seeking 5% growth for South Africa so that you can make hay while the sun shines, as Christine Lagarde pointed out. South Africa is lagging global growth, 3.9%. If you look at economies like Ethiopia, the fastest growing in sub-Saharan Africa, 8.5%. Ghana, Kenya, great examples. Rwanda. South Africa needs to up its growth, and really how you translate, fill this gap, Francis, between what they're projecting at 1.5%. The South African Reserve Bank says 1.7%. Cyril Ramaphosa wants 3%. How you fill that gap remains to be seen.
Yeah, how do we meet our potential? Have you seen the finance minister walking around? What sort of schedule does he have? What does he spend his time doing at a meeting like this?
Very briefly earlier today, Francis, we were sort of waiting for his car to pull up. He went straight into a meeting of BRICS. Of course, South Africa chairing BRICS, South Africa chairing the SADC finance ministers meeting, and of course also chairing the IMFC. So, speaking to Treasury officials, they do feel that they, sort of back home. He's come back home. I'll quote what he said to us briefly on his way into that meeting. "It's been hectic. I've just hit the ground running, and this is how life is in this place," referring to Washington and the IMF meetings. And it feels like being back home again, but with different challenges. And off he went. We are due to speak to him tomorrow, Francis. We were due to speak to him today. They changed this due to the fluidity of his schedule. We'll also speak to the Reserve Bank Governor, Lesetja Kganyago, tomorrow. But certainly, I think there's a great deal of optimism. But if we are to refer to what the IMF is saying about what South Africa needs to do, we're talking here about structural reform. South Africa needs to change the way the economy is currently structured. They need to open up new sectors. They need to allow more investment in telecommunications and in transport. These are two areas that the World Economic Outlook report highlighted. And also they talk about policy uncertainty. Now, we've had the political leadership change in South Africa, but the IMF is still talking about policy uncertainty. So this is something that policy stakeholders, economic policy stakeholders in South Africa have to seriously grapple with if we are going to move out of this low growth trap at 1.5%, even 3%, when the requirement at the very least is what the NDP spells out at 5%, Francis.
Is this a chance for us, Sherwin, to gauge how the world is receiving the political changes? We keep on saying there's optimism, but here are the people that count.
Absolutely, and the clearest indication of that, Francis, is that they are not meeting with ratings agencies at this meeting. They normally do. It's been all hands on deck. It's been S&P, it's been Moody's, it's been Fitch. That was always on the itinerary for finance ministers that attended the IMF World Bank meetings. And for the first time, that is no longer the case. I did speak to a Treasury official who said that really they do feel that the wind is at their back. They're chairing these various committees. Nhlanhla Nene, in his own words, saying it's nice to be back home. I think they're certainly been welcomed back into the fold. But still focusing very much on the new challenges, as he put it. Yes, we're hitting the road running, but there are, of course, all these new challenges. And as I mentioned, they pertain to the structural reforms that are so critically needed to get South Africa moving again.
Finally, Sherwin, you mentioned Lesetja Kganyago. Is this a man, is everyone learning his name at the IMF and World Bank?
I might have to help a few people with that. Absolutely. I mean, I attended a seminar with Christine Lagarde and Lesetja Kganyago last year, at the last meeting in October, and she just referred to him as my friend Lesetja. She didn't even tackle his surname. So I imagine it's a bit of a tongue twister. We have the same problem at the United Nations with Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Trust me, we've heard a few versions. Francis, I also personally have a few issues with my last name. People don't seem to get that one right either.
You're targeting me, Sherwin. I'm very sorry. Thank you for being with us live from Washington. Sherwin Bryce, Let's Try This. Peace is with us, and he will continue that coverage from the World Bank and the IMF spring meetings.